Claire's biographical details would have been circulated to you by email and on the circular as well. But without further ado, I'll ask Claire to speak for a while, and then when she's got her breath back, we'll take some questions and answers. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's a great honour to have the opportunity of speaking to you all. I'm not an experienced public speaker, so please excuse any inadequacies on my part. The subject tonight is something that I think is commonsensical and obvious, but perhaps only to me. And so, if there are any ideas you don't understand, I don't mind if you put up your hand as if you were in a class to ask me to elaborate in case some points are not clear. But I'm just hoping that it will be. So tonight's topic, nationalism and conservatism. I've always thought they were more or less the same thing. I've always thought that the role of conservatism is to conserve the national interest. And what is the national interest? Nobody has ever defined it. You have all these politicians saying that they're acting in the national interest, but they never define it, and nobody ever calls them up on it. So you have Cameron saying that he's bombing Syria in the national interest, and nobody ever wants to question him what it could possibly mean. And also, nationalism is not something that has been properly defined, probably because many people are ashamed or embarrassed to talk about, say, it's all about turfing up people we don't want and that sort of thing, and they don't quite want to say that, and then they just want to talk about the nice aspects of nationalism, which is all about national identity and group solidarity and all that sort of thing. But there was a time when the Conservative Party, or a faction of it, such as the Monday Club, who were quite unashamedly proposing voluntary repatriation. And I think some of you may be familiar with that idea. That was a long time ago. I have before me this article that I printed out from the Telegraph, and that was dated 2001. It's by a Labour writer called Sean Simon, and it's entitled "Some Conservatives Are Obsessed with Repatriation." And they were. I remember when I first came to London, I got to know a Sikh girlfriend, and she was solidly Labour supporting, and I did meet her family, and they seemed completely convinced that they would be sent on the first banana boat home if the Tories ever got into power. I beg to differ, but that was not something they would accept. But then that was what the Labour Party, the party that they supported, had firmly drummed into their consciousness, that would be the first thing that would happen to them if any of them dared to vote Conservative. But of course, Asian people are very socially conservative people, and I'm sure they identify with a lot of things that conservatism stands for, such as financial prudence, saving, looking after one's family, getting married, staying married, having children, and all those, I suppose, things that the left would find terribly boring. So nowadays, Asian Britons would be more prepared to join the Conservative Party because they've discovered the lie that the Labour Party had been telling them about being sent on the first banana boat home. But that brings us to anti-immigration parties like the BNP, who were in fact proposing this thing called voluntary repatriation. So I would suggest that therein lies the link between ideas of conservatism and ideas of nationalism. For nationalism is, after all, this idea of group solidarity, this idea that we should know the people that we identify with and wish to share a nation with, and I suppose the ideal of nationalists would be, the highest aspiration of nationalists would be to live in a country where our countrymen are as easily identifiable as members of our own family. So it gives people a great sense of comfort to think that we can just visually recognise who is or isn't our countrymen. But that's not the only form of nationalism, of course. There's this thing called civic nationalism, where apart from race, you can be part of this gang, this group, as long as you subscribe to certain things or fulfill certain criteria, such as being born in the country or being given citizenship, and so on and so forth. So that seems to be mostly what nationalism is about. I mean, I would add that nationalism would be, to me, promoting the national interest, whatever that is. I would suggest, nobody's actually defined what the national interest is, but I attempt to have a list of things that nationalism ought to be promoting. I would suggest that the first thing that comes to mind is social stability, social cohesion. And what does this all mean? I think it just means a general sharing of moral values and some common view about the eternal verities of life. So when I talk about the eternal verities of life, we might just sort of look at each other and think, yes, I know exactly what she's on about, or you could very well say, well, I don't know what she's on about. And I suggest that this is actually a very old-fashioned phrase that only the older generation would know about human nature and so forth. But anyway, what we're talking about is this idea of group solidarity, this idea that we are all agreed about what the law should be, what morality should be, and our attitude towards it ought to be. But unfortunately, this is now being challenged because I think one of the most important things about national identity is this idea of having a dominant culture. This will, of course, send all the minority groups scattering with nervousness, because the first question that will occur to them is, what is this dominant culture going to do to us? It will force us, perhaps, to adopt ideas or a dress or an ideology that we might dislike, and will take away from us our own individual identity. But I think we can't get away from that. You know, if we want our nation to be readily identifiable and our countrymen to be readily identifiable, there will be a number of things that we expect. If it's not just appearance or race, then it must be language or ideology or behaviour or modes of dress, that sort of thing. But let's explore this idea of social stability. What does that actually mean, apart from ideas of social cohesion and being generally agreed on what things should be? I suggest to you that we will soon know that we don't have it when we have war and revolution, crime and civil disorder, a sudden increase in the population, as well as the composition of the population. So it could mean, a sudden loss of population, even an imbalance between men and women, and that would happen after a ruinous war where many men die as casualties and as war casualties. An imbalance between the old and young, that also causes social instability. An imbalance between, or a noticeable change between members of the indigenous population and migrants suddenly arriving, as in Germany. This could lead to a rejection of the prevailing orthodoxy, whatever it may be. We have in history examples of that. So during the Cold War, between capitalism and communism, certainly during the Reformation, there were the wars of religion when Catholicism and Protestantism were at war with each other. And then during the 1848 revolutions, there was this idea of autocracy, or monarchy if you prefer, and democracy, when people thought they would have a different form of government. And now, of course, we have this debate between whether liberal democracy should, well, of course, no, that's not quite happening yet, but liberal democracy is now being challenged by Islam, in that certain radical Muslims are proposing a theocracy because they think that might be better for them, and they suggest for us as well. This is certainly what radicals like Anjem Choudhury are saying. And now, more immediately, we have ideological battle between what is called neoconservatism and neoliberalism, and that would be represented by Hillary Clinton, and protectionism, nationalism, and isolationism as represented by Donald Trump. These are ideas that are diametrically opposed to each other, and so we can see trouble ahead, or certainly the ones who now hold the power, who are the proponents of neoconservatism and neoliberalism, feel threatened and don't want things to change. But let's talk about conservatism. There's been a few people, scholars who have tried to define it. Out of all the conservative thinkers I've come across, I thought the American political thinker Russell Kirk sums it up very well. He has 6 canons of conservatism. So, and I'll just read out to you the first one, which is a belief in a transcendental order based in tradition or divine revelation or natural law. So this seems to be suggesting some idea of God using religion as a instrument of conservatism. Am I going too fast? No, okay. The second canon of conservatism says it's an affection of the variety and mystery of human existence. This suggests to me God as well, or some transcendental experience. The third canon of conservatism is a conviction that society requires orders and classes that emphasize natural distinctions. This would suggest to me age and class distinctions as well as sex distinctions. The fourth one is a belief that property and freedom are closely linked. This is, of course, quite libertarian and American, about the sanctity of property and how we should, all have a right to it, and that it should be respected in contract and by the state. The fifth one is a faith in custom, convention, and prescription. Of course, tradition. Finally, the sixth one, a recognition that innovation must be tied to existing traditions and customs, which entails a respect for the political value of prudence. So, how are we to carry on these traditions? I think it must be quite obvious that we can only pass on what we have to the next generation. That must be the only way, to have more human beings, just for one thing, and secondly, to have people who resemble our outlook in some way. So, whatever knowledge we might have or traditions we might have, we would pass it on. And the most efficient way of passing it on is through the family, through the celebration of Christmas and Easter or whatever festivals we might have. And such things, I suppose, are only possible to celebrate within the family. We can have sort of wider traditions such as football, national days that other countries might have, Bastille Day, 4th of July, and that kind of thing. But the more sort of more personal and more familial traditions that can only be passed on within the family. Judaism is a very good example, because there are many festivals in Judaism and Islam. I mean, far more than Christianity, which is really only Easter and Christmas, as far as I've noticed after so many years of living in this country. And for the celebration of these traditions, it's almost impossible to do it if you're a single person. You really need a fairly big house and a woman prepared to do the cooking. So I remember from my childhood that my father would be banging on about tradition, and my mother would be rolling her eyes because it only meant putting up with dreadful relations of his that she didn't like, and well, she didn't like it, but he thought it was important. I didn't quite see the point of it until now. So, if you're living in a 2-bedroom flat, you're not going to be doing much entertaining. And as for my childhood, I do happen to remember that our Sundays were taken up with going to my grandparents' house, because they had the biggest house, and we would all go there. The children would play and the adults would talk politics, and that was our way of keeping in touch with each other. And well, the Chinese had quite a lot of festivals as well that required a lot of cooking and entertaining. So I guess this is how it's done. And if you don't have a big house or a woman prepared to go along with all the festivities and do the cooking, then it becomes very difficult to carry this on. And this brings us nicely into the subject of marriage and how it's important, how it is indeed crucial for this practice to carry on in order for any society at all to carry on its traditions. Sadly, however, this is an institution that has been, well, diluted in so many ways over the decades. I suggest that feminism has had its part in it, in the sense that everything about feminism undermines marriage, doesn't it? I mean, why do women even put up with men? Because well, usually it's because they own the house and they bring home the bacon, and they had more money than us. I mean, I certainly remember a friend of mine who said that once she discovered that she could make money out of journalism, she left her drunkard of her husband. So that seems pretty clear. So that seems to be the key, that the working mother normalised the working mother, normalised the divorced mother, and the divorced mother normalised the single mother. And if we're mostly singly parented, then we won't be enjoying all these wonderful festivities that our parents and our grandparents used to do in their whole families. So it becomes very difficult to pass on these traditions to the next generation, and it also has caused, what am I trying to say? Yes, adolescents of I think adolescents are actually very, very intolerant people. If they're very snobbish, they're very cliquey, they don't like how older people look because we're old and uncool and we don't have, the right clothes and they're ashamed to be seen with their parents. Quite often, they like to think that they arrived on earth cool and beautiful and young, fully formed with no input from their parents, no money, no nurturing. They just arrived fully cool and fully formed, and they're not going to listen to anything we say because they don't have to, and they've got their friends to be cliquey with, and parents are just uncool. And sadly, when parents break up, it becomes even harder to manage them, because I've noticed that even as a child I would try to play off one parent against the other. If one parent says I can't, I'd go to the other one and ask if I can, and quite often even with undivorced parents it works very nicely. But if you have two divorced parents, I think a lot of children do even make a point of getting two of everything, shall we say. And so, and of course parents feel guilty about not staying together, and they fob them off with consumer goods, and this makes them, shallow people, perhaps. They have this obsession with brands and, cool brands, and not being seen dead wearing certain other brands, and it makes them superficial and snobbish and actually quite intolerant, because if they only mix with other people like them, they won't be able to understand what previous generations thought. And coming from an extended family, I've always found that you've always got all these mad relations who say terrible things and were very rude to you, and you have to put up with them because they're family, and if you didn't, there'd be trouble. So you'd have a good idea about how mad people can get even within your own family. So that sort of opens your eyes out a bit about, hierarchy and good group solidarity and that kind of thing. And which children these days don't, and sadly for many single parents, they tend to confide in their children, giving them the equality that perhaps they do not deserve. And yes, and I think that might give them ideas above their station, and this becomes very difficult in trying to pass on your ideas about what is and what should and shouldn't be the case. So, and the other thing about marriage is that it has actually a main idea, which is that the marriage license was really a license for the married couple to have conjugal relations with each other, and the implication of this is that no one else. Anyone who doesn't have a marriage license is not allowed to have any relations, physical relations with each other. So that would be a very difficult idea to get past most people now, because the assumption now, of course, is that consensual sex between adults is a human right, if not an actual sacred human right that nobody will now question. So it is, I think we find ourselves, in a very difficult position now. And of course, all these ideas of smaller families and fewer children has a knock-on impact on a nation's ability to sustain itself. Because, this leads to labour shortages, which causes the appeal of importing foreign labour irresistible. Because if you didn't have foreign labour, then, who knows, you could go back to the 3-day week and wildcat strikes of the 1970s, and this wouldn't do at all. So this is, I suggest, the reason why the Conservative Party, although they sound stern about immigration, that they really have to let them in order to fill the vacancies that the locals are not prepared to do. Of course, they're not going to tell us why they're doing it, but that must be the reason. And so, for this reason, the Monday Club has been slowly, ever so slowly, marginalised and now kicked out of the Conservative Party. And it's been happening since 2001, I know, and it was Ian Duncan Smith who put the boot in and said, no, we can't have this sort of thing being said about us anymore. I found a stray quote. There we are. I'm not quite sure how to fit that in. But this is a quote I found from the playwright, a left-wing playwright, describing the Monday Club in 1986. His name is David Edgar.
Oh, yes. I can't get further left than
I was in the club in 86, like you.
But it's such a delicious quote. I feel I must quote it to you. So he describes the Monday Club as proselytising the ancient and venerable conservative traditions of paternalism, imperialism, and racism.
Yeah.
Is that not nationalism?
Racism, what was it? Imperialism.
And racism. So I think I'll take a sip of water now, if that's all right.
You can have nationalism, of course, without any reference to race. The nationalism, for example, of Mussolini and Salazar was not based upon the principles of race identity or race superiority at all.
No.
It's the idea that racism, which is a word I don't recognise,
Well,
for years wasn't in the dictionary,
yes.
cannot be equated with nationalism. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. I mean, that's actually a very helpful interjection, which leads me back to religion when you were talking about, when you were making a point about race. So we go back to religion. We know that Christianity came from Judaism. Jews are a tribe, and so they had to have their tribal solidarity, and they had all those rules, 10 commandments and no adultery and that sort of thing. And well, to be fair to them, they have managed to keep their tribal identity. They are certainly the most powerful tribe in the whole world, and that is because the whole religion makes them do all these things, like, well, the Sabbath for one thing. They have to keep to it, and the Sabbath is all about spending time with each other, festivals, and this would, of course, give any group a sense of solidarity with each other. Well, Christians used to have the Sabbath, but that went out with the Sunday trading laws, and that means our new religion now is, well, it is sex and shopping, isn't it?
Yes.
So, well, that is our new religion, and we have to, we're never told these things officially, that our new religion is now sex and shopping, but it is just by the way the laws are geared. So, if you say you don't want, you're a good Christian, and some employees of I don't know, Home Base or B&Q have said they're told, well, we don't want you because you can't work on Sundays, and the whole point of us is to open on Sundays. So if we don't even have the time or a special day set aside to keep in touch with our families and friends, we will find ourselves increasingly isolated, and then I suppose eventually unable to bear each other's company or cooperate with each other to fight the enemy, whoever that may be. So all these things are in fact related, I would suggest. As for how to get it back, well, I don't know. How are we going to get it back? We'll have to change the laws. But how are we going to change the laws? Nobody, I don't think anybody is. I don't think there is a single political party in the land who has proposed any measure that might support marriage, unless it's gay marriage.
Everyone's in favour of gay marriage, I'm afraid.
No, well, well, actually, gay marriage is of course the dilution of the original idea and the original purpose of marriage, which is of course to go forth and multiply. That was the whole point of it all. And of course, in multiplying, you get the manpower whereby empires are acquired and formed and maintained. But now we have an aging and shrinking population. But don't worry, it's not just you lot. It's happening. It all happened in China. The demographic time bomb in China is far worse because of their one-child policy. I've met many Chinese people who say, well, we can't even afford the only one child that we were allowed to have because they're so damn expensive, aren't they? So, and of course we've also heard that the Japanese are shrinking in numbers as well because men don't seem to want to find girlfriends, preferring to stay in their rooms and play their computer games and that sort of thing. So, who seems to be doing quite well? Well, I think we all know who seems to be multiplying, and this may be a cause of unease, I suppose, but I don't think we should look upon these things with too much alarm, as long as we understand the causes.
Can I just briefly interject, and be very quick? The original notion of marriage, according to English law, was set in a law case called Hyde and Hyde in 1866. And it was a voluntary union, the one man and one woman,
Yes.
to the exclusion of all others, till death us do part.
Yes.
And that was a fundamental principle of Christian marriage. Hyde and Hyde and subsequent laws have never been repealed, which is why so-called gay marriage is nothing short of an absolute abomination, and shouldn't have any head. I'm not talking about civil partnership, and I'm not seeking to be ungenerous or unkind towards homosexual people, but the notion that any relationship that they may have as marriage is very recent. We are one of 15 countries in the world
Yes.
that have it, out of 186.
But the West is intent on spreading it to other countries.
Yes.
So that may be a source of why, well, you're getting a reaction from the Middle East. They don't want it, and Africa too. They don't like it. They don't want any of that. So.
And Russia.
Yes. Yes. So, but surely the original purpose of marriage was for procreation, not for recreation. It is procreative sex, and of course recreational sex is, was only the privilege of the married, and that was, how you would keep up the numbers of your population. And yes, so the conclusion seems to be that it's all related to sex, and really it's a very difficult thing to come to terms with when I first came upon it, because really a lot of people don't really care. People think, this will last me my lifetime. By the time, the Muslims take over or something like that, I'll be dead. And so they shrug it off, and they think, well, there's not much I can do anyway, because really the mountain is so high and so steep. Where do you even begin to explain this to an MP? Will he take up this cause? I can't imagine. I don't think even Philip Davis, who seems to have made a name for himself, about.
That's the problem. Half the House of Commons is gay.
That's what he was saying. Yes. And the other quarter is female. That might be. So I'm afraid I've just laid out the. Well, any more questions? Any questions?
Okay, we can move on to questions if you want now. Any questions at all? So Daniel?
Yeah.
Almost all our political parties are led by women. Where again?
Well, I blame the men. You allowed it to happen. You just let it happen. And then say, oh, well, the women have taken over. There's nothing we can do now.
Men are fit though, aren't they?
Well, there is the weaker sex, and there's the even weaker sex, it would appear.
We're the strongest.
We still got Jeremy Corbyn. Living hope.
I think
Can I just ask a question relating to the very beginning of your speech?
Mm-hmm.
You described nationalism, which was something that could be equated almost with conservatism.
Mm-hmm.
If I may say, I disagree with that. I think nationalism as a political philosophy has its root in both the left and the right. And for example, if you apply that view to certain issues of policy making, you could well argue, and certainly in my opinion, not my opinion, means a great deal, but it is my opinion that, for instance, the privatization of the utilities is something that should never have happened, because you should not, in principle, be able to make a profit out of water or gas or electricity. All these things should be in public hands. The same thing, in my opinion, with the railways. I think there's certainly a strong debatable argument of taking the railways back into public ownership. Now, if you do those sort of things, the roots of those arguments lie basically in socialism. Now, I know it's,
clause for the Labour Party.
I know it's an unwise thing to say, but I'm going to say it. And it doesn't mean to say that I'm equated with the Nazis, because I'm not. I am a sort of National Socialist. A lot of my views are based on certain issues of socialism, as well as the profit motive in conservatism. But the national idea of putting the nation first, of patriotism, which nationalism is a political expression of patriotism.
Yes.
Nationalism is really a combination of both left and right ideologies.
Yes.
I think that should be better understood.
Yes, I don't think there's anything in conservatism that says you have to sell off your public utilities. I think it was just the attempt of Thatcher to gerrymander the vote, because she had to give she was targeting the lower middle classes in order and to give them all these goodies, so they'll always vote Tory, and she did succeed at that level by selling off council houses and things. So that worked for her, but this idea seemed to have spread throughout the world, because of course it is always attractive to sell off things in order to get what you want, because there appear to be no consequences. But
you did that with the monasteries, for example.
Yeah, oh yes, of course, that's such a good point, Tim. Yes.
That was
Yes.
the first privatisation.
Yes, Richard?
Yes, one thing I'd like to point out is this dichotomy between socialism and nationalism is a relatively recent invention in Europe and the United States. Whenever you've seen socialism triumph, for instance, Stalin was probably nearly as much a nationalist as he was a socialist. So was Mao, so was Ceausescu, when all these people were absolute monsters, but nevertheless they were successful by marrying socialism and nationalism. Now, the socialism we have in the West, which is not really socialism, has lost faith in public ownership and in anything really, and is anti-nationalistic, has not achieved any socialist aims whatever. So it's achieved nothing but failure for itself. Whenever socialism has been successful, it has been connected to some degree with nationalism.
There's no private enterprise under Mao or Stalin.
No, I didn't say he wasn't a socialist. I said he was also a nationalist.
Yes. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
Gareth?
I'd take Sam's point, but selling off national assets isn't conservatism.
No, I didn't.
Laissez-faire liberalism.
Yes.
The point about nationalism in Britain is it meets conservatism because there is no British race as such. We're a nation of 4 kindred peoples: English, Scottish, Northern Irish and Welsh. Nationalism in Britain is civic nationalism, which is loyalty to shared institutions, the principal one of which is the monarchy. The second one is the Protestant religion, and the third one is parliamentary democracy. That defines us as a nation, and I would say that's essentially national conservatism.
Yes. But the attempt by Hitler, I mean, what he did when he joined the German Labour Party, because he thought, well, if he's going to have a career in politics, the Labour Party would be the one that would get the most people, because there are always more workers than are middle class people. And of course, I think he was trying to get the best of socialism and the best of nationalism, and then he called it National Socialism, and that was it. Of course, the anti-Semitism bit was the extra bit, but then I would say anti-Semitism is sort of pretty well established all over Christian Europe anyway, and if you've read Merchant of Venice or Fiddler on the Roof, we know what sort of thing went on in those times. But the thing is the national interest is almost predictable in that in the Philippines no foreigner can get to buy any property unless they had a Filipino partner, a Filipino co-owner. So I suppose that's the way they keep their property prices under their control. So foreigners don't just sort of go in and keep the prices so high that the locals can't afford to buy anymore, the way our government doesn't seem to care about that sort of thing. But I suppose in theory all these things can be reversed, except that it seems very difficult to see how it's going to happen when no one in politics is prepared to admit any mistake. That they're not. Well, I can't see them sort of even admitting that they've made any mistakes at all. Certainly the selling off of council houses, I mean, they weren't built to be sold off, they were built to house the urban poor. And if you sell them off, then, well, I mean, you're not using it for the right reasons, in the same way that, you're not using marriage for the right reasons if you give it to gay people, because they're not interested in rearing the next generation. I mean, marriage was, after all, for the purpose of rearing the next generation. And really, it wasn't even a romantic thing. It was all about, property between families and passing down property through the generations. We know that, in previous times and previous generations, nobody thought that much about the romance of it. It wasn't a day of romance. One was just betrothed in childhood because it was, it was some dynastic alliance or something. It's possible that the romantic movement may have been the cause of the downfall of Western civilization. There's this deliberate emotionalizing of everything and making emotion the most important thing of existence. It's difficult to sort of go back to reason and looking at the reasons for things. With conservatism, it's not even properly defined, nor socialism. If you go to the Conservative Party constitution, you will find references to the principles of the Conservative Party, but no listing of those principles at all.
That's because it hasn't got.
Well,
the problem in this country is there is no genuine Conservative Party.
It has
the
to be.
Conservative Party, as it stands, certainly isn't a Conservative Party. The nearest thing to it is
Mrs. Thatcher made a terrible blunder when she decided to pass the Housing Homeless Persons Act and the Housing Act of 1988. She said this was in accord with the ideal of a property-owning democracy. What, of course, she'd never considered was that it would lead to the massive shortage of social housing, some of which we are seeing today, by not allowing local authorities to use the receipts from the sale of council houses to construct more social housing. Now that would have been a nationalist ideal, because you'd be serving the people. What Mrs. Thatcher and the people around her, particularly Sir Keith Joseph, who in fact, he was a fine man in many ways, but he was a liberal. Well, what he wanted was he wanted to see the service of the property-owning democracy. And the best way that could be done, in his view, was to minimise the value of local authorities. I don't see that it could possibly be argued in Mrs. Thatcher's time that the Conservative Party had any nationalistic ideas at all.
No.
She repeatedly voted against sanctions.
Well, I remember Harold Macmillan.
And 101 other things.
Yeah, Harold Macmillan did accuse her of selling off the family silver, didn't he? I don't know it was what exactly he was referring to, but she was certainly selling a lot of national assets off. But to the extent that Tony Blair had to promise that he wouldn't just go and renationalise everything if he came to power, and that was what the Clause 4 was, the Labour Party split about Clause 4 was about in 1995. Yes.
Okay, Chris Watts.
Sorry.
Sorry, I take Chris Watts, then I'll
Okay,
take yourself.
yeah.
I didn't see your hand, so
Okay.
I will take Chris Watts, please. Yeah, you had your hand up, Chris. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies again for my lateness. So you've probably covered this already earlier in your talk, but no doubt you've gone through a whole range of threats that we face now to Western civilization. Can we undo some of this realistically in the light of political correctness, which I see as the biggest threat to Western civilization?
Well, only if we're prepared to defy them and say, look, I'll say all these politically incorrect things, you must do your worst. It's only really being prepared to say that and perhaps lose our jobs, lose our contracts. There is no easy way of doing it, is there? No. I mean, we've seen from the examples of these Muslim radicals. They're not afraid, and we have to be as fearless as they are, or we won't get anywhere, will we?
Perhaps a leader who will be fearless may appear in America, perhaps.
Yes.
But there's an answer to that, just on that, I'll be very quick. There's an answer to that, which is that we know in this country, there'll be books written about it, recently by a woman called Ines Bowen, called From Medina to Birmingham, that 50% of the mosques in this country, the latest count is 1,719 mosques in Britain, 50% of those mosques are controlled by extreme conservative ideas of Islam, by the Wahhabis, the Salafis, the Deobandis. And in those mosques they talk about kuffars. You're a kuffar, I'm a kuffar, you're an infidel, I'm an infidel because we're not Muslims. There's an answer to these people which any government with guts would do and say to hell with the consequences, and that is to close down those mosques, the 50% of them, that are spouting this nonsense against our own people.
I'm sure that there are already spies within the
And the
community.
failure to do this is a sign of chronic weakness which will lead us to disaster. So there are things that can be done. What cannot be done is to imbue people like Mrs. May, who is a disastrous Home Secretary. I'll give her time to see what she can do. But to get into the head of this woman, that we don't want talk, we want action.
Should pull them all down and build that.
Okay.
I think that's a question from Rob.
Yeah.
There was a question over there.
Yes, sorry, this gentleman.
I see. You're talking about, that's all right, with the politicians getting them to stand up. The trouble is everybody has been re-educated. All the young people, all the middle class. It's cultural Marxism. It is political correctness. And it will change, I think, and will come from the working class for when our whole culture starts to slide. And we can't afford things anymore. People won't be able to afford to have these political belief systems anymore. And once the Muslims start getting, because the thing is the police protect the Muslims, and they protect the social justice warriors, which are the extreme left-wing people. They protect the Black Lives Matter, who are sort of the most racist thing that there is around. Certainly makes the KKK. They were once were powerful. They're now gone. But the government won't do it because the people don't have the will yet, because things haven't got bad enough. And when it does, I think that's when people will start waking up. And since Brexit, we've seen in public, with public speaking, people are changing, and it's scaring a lot of people. But this is what I think. I don't think the government's going to do anything because they're not affected.
Yeah, but we're not allowed to say anything, are we?
Is there any possibility, may I ask, is there any possibility regarding mosques, any possibility a future government might do to the mosques what Henry VIII did to the monasteries?
Turn them into churches.
One way of raising a lot of funds, dealing with the national debt.
Yes.
They don't seem to be very valuable buildings, sadly.
They could be sold off for housing, council house.
Build a lot of flats on it, couldn't you?
Chris Watts, people that we're not going to be
Right, Chris Watts, please.
So I wondered if I could ask you now about immigration. Now, it seems to me that our immigration policy has been, I think the polite description would be piecemeal. Sometimes I think we have no immigration policy except to just let everyone in. And this is manifesting itself in some very, very unpleasant characteristics. For example, I do not believe that there was ever an endemic problem in this country with corruption. Corruption in the smallest sense of the word. We now have a problem with corruption, which we see, in the way that certain East London boroughs have conducted their voting affairs. I just wonder whether you see any hope post Brexit that we really can bring immigration under control, and more importantly, teach traditional British values.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if there is the will to do it. We can, sit here and talk about these things, but do people outside this room care about it? I don't know. I mean, it just seems so. Do UKIP even talk about it? That's the closest party that we can think of. They don't talk about these things, do they? They seem to want to play safe. And there's Diane James. We don't know their new leader, and we don't know what they're going to say.
UKIP are not conservatives. They go on gay pride marches and things like this. I can't see how UKIP can be seriously conservative party.
Well, I mean, it seems that although there are lots of complaints about the Muslims, it's really the Muslims who seem to, whose principles would be more or less something. Well, not the corruption bit, of course, but the family and marriage and that kind of thing. Because they are social conservatives, and
they reject Christianity. They reject it. This is a Christian country.
Yes, but if there are not enough Christians to go to church, then...
If we challenge the Muslims, they'll be violent within seconds. If they think their mosque or their way of life, even if they're living in Luton. And they know that, and in a way our country's been cuckolded, just as many through extreme feminism, our men have been. And it's not, I always say women are people like men. Feminism's an ideology, and it's a cultural Marxist ideology. And Marx was saying in the late 1800s about the breakup of the family is communism. And people don't realise what it is. It's all connected. And it came from, the American universities, the long march through the institutions, re-educating the young. Yes. And this is what's happened, and the will isn't there yet. But when things change and things get harsh, it will. And unfortunately, we've had, I think immigration, I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think you have to be white to be British, but these people are colonising Britain, and they are not acknowledging that Britain is a country.
They see weakness and they exploit it.
Oh yeah, it's because we're weak, we've been cuckolded. That's what I think.
UKIP has no ideology. If they fail now, it will be because Farage and other people in the UKIP reject any notion of nationalism. That is why they, despite a certain person, namely myself, writing numerous letters to them, saying that they should seek alliances with the Front National in France and the other nationalist parties in Europe, they refuse to do so. Because they're non-ideological.
Well, the cautious, aren't they? Richard, did you have a question?
Yes, this is almost off topic, but very interesting anyway. You were talking earlier on about who outside this room is interested in the old traditions, the old Britain, and actually work very well. Occasionally I write about it on my blog, and I find there's an enormous amount of interest in these issues in Russia, of all places, because they feel they've had their souls stolen on them through
Yes.
the socialist experience,
Yes.
and are trying to seek it wherever they may.
Yes. Well, foreigners like this idea of a bygone Britain, stately homes and people in Victorian dress and all that kind of thing. So it certainly, sells to the tourists, and I don't know, but it has to be sort of organic and real, not, a show that you put on just to. But I don't know. There are always new traditions as the old ones die away, and we just have to see what it's going to be. Yes, Tim.
May I ask a question about national? Just want to put a question to you about national solidarity. Now, last year I went on a cruise to the Baltic, and we had some excellent speakers on board. One speaker was a man, a diplomat, British diplomat, who had previously been retired. He had been ambassador to Norway, and so he knew a great deal about Scandinavian countries and was illiterate. And it is well known, we all know, that in Scandinavia they have this fantastic welfare state that looks after so much and looks after everybody from cradle to the grave. And he explained that this is the belief, the great Scandinavian belief in this national solidarity and working hard at providing for those who are less fortunate amongst your country, is beginning to crack. And then he said, previously it was absolutely central to the Scandinavian experience, but the belief in it is now beginning to crack. And he said the reason is because previously, when he first went to Scandinavia as a diplomat, they were one tribe. And it was quite clear what he was saying, but very interesting that a man who had been Her Majesty's ambassador to Norway should be so bold as to openly say, to draw attention to the fact that the population there was no longer one tribe. Now, would you feel that the type of benefit system that you have in Scandinavia or have elsewhere, the welfare system, is likely to be connected with national solidarity and therefore perhaps to receive less public support once that situation no longer exists as it did previously?
Well, I think people have been saying for a while that the welfare state causes a family to break up because people think, well, I don't have to put up with my horrible family, horrible husband, horrible, whatever. I'm going out, I'm moving out, and the government will provide me with a flat if I'm pregnant and unmarried and so on and so forth. So the government and the taxpayer, of course, funds this sort of, family breakdown. But sadly, I think what we're all agreed on seems to be that the welfare state is sacred and nothing must happen to it. This is what the right and left seem to agree on. And so this, this monster carries on, destroying our lives and our family and our traditions because we feel we can't do without it. Yes, Michael.
I just want to say that's the left wing does not represent the working class. And whenever I hear nationalists saying, our forefathers didn't fight for this, we should also be saying our working class ancestors did not go on strike for this. Our working class, the miners, they didn't go on strike for gay marriage, they didn't go on strike for mass immigration, they didn't go on strike for thought control, they didn't go on strike for welfareism for single mothers. No, they went on strike for jobs. They went on strike for better conditions, and they went on strike for pensions. Those are the values of the working class, which the left does not represent. It represents the values of the low-life vermin you find on the university campus who just come up with moral relativist, nihilistic rubbish.
Good for that. So there you are.
I have one final?
Yeah, one final question, yeah. Then I'll do a vote of thanks, yeah.
When you're looking at welfare, I think the guinea pig that the welfare was actually the black community in America. And when they used to marry the black people, it was the welfare that utterly, totally destroyed their culture. And if you've heard of the economist Thomas Sowell, he talks about that. He came out of poverty, and he's in his 70s, he's a top economist. He's always been against what the welfare has done to black people. And he talks about, like, with the minimum wage, he says it destroys people, because he says if you're flipping burgers and in January, it doesn't mean you're going to be doing it in December. And he said they actually, no one can afford to employ so many people. And it actually seems wrong to what you'd think. You'd think, well, people should have a basic living wage, but what it means is that people can't employ as many people. And the black communities in America are utterly destroyed. So in the cities, you've got sluts and thug cultures, which just are appalling for the people who are in them. And I think that's what welfare can do.
Yes. Well, welfare means a big state. So, you know, really, we don't need a big state if we have our families and our extended families intact. But then we will have to suffer the inconvenience of putting up with them. So, you know, yes. Oh,
I just think the welfare state has changed its form in the sense that in the past people are expected to pay in before they take out, and that idea has gradually been lost. It's also not a very good idea to have a welfare state which lets in unlimited immigrants, so anyone can come into the country and take out when they have to put in. You can change the welfare state back to providing a sort of minimum cover and making sure you get contributions.
A more contributive welfare state. I quite agree.
Yes.
Very good.
If there's no more questions, Daniel? Okay, good. Okay.
Gareth mentioned the institutions that people adhere to. They've been destroyed, they've been corroded by individualism and nihilism. There is nothing to assimilate to. But this corrosion is happening globally. So though the Muslims are perceived as the great enemy, in fact they've been corroded as well. Obviously the radicals are doing their best to fight back. Surely the only two states with the mass to resist this global corrosion is Russia and China, and only when Russia or China, either one, supplant the USA as the global power will this change, this whole system start to change.
Well, that seems to be, that would take too long, and I would hate to have all these things happening long after I'm dead, and therefore I would like there to be a more immediate way of doing things, and I suppose we owe it to ourselves really to point out what the problems are and to say what they are, and if the problem seems to be the corrosion of marriage, stopping us from passing on our traditions and our knowledge and our wisdom to the next generation, then surely we can all ask for the institution of marriage to be better respected. But I suspect people won't do that because I think that they feel they're out on a limb, and people don't really get it, and it's very difficult to explain. The consequences are not immediate, and then we're likely to be mocked just for mentioning the subject. I don't think China's having a lot of divorces, and so Russia too, and that may be to do with a lack of religion or the lack of laws that support marriage. So if there are no consequences to walking out on your spouse, then people will do it because they get bored and they're irritated and they think they can do better, and they're often encouraged to think they can do better. Often they don't. I have plenty of female friends who left their husbands and took up with men that I thought were lesser men than their husbands, but it's too late by then. So I don't know. I mean, the whole culture has to change, and therefore the law has to change, and we have to be able to persuade the politicians now, or put these ideas to them, or perhaps write a book and they'll read it. I mean, will they read it? I don't think they will read anything that or will vote for anything, because they have very little power when you think about it. Our MPs have even less free speech than we do. If you think about it, if they say anything wrong, the media are onto them, and they're mocked, and then they're demoted, and sacked from the cabinet or whatever. So they're not going to stick their necks out for us if it means suffering any financial loss or loss of position. So actually, I don't think our MPs have enough rights. That's why they won't stand up for anything, because they don't see it as worth a candle.
I mean, nothing
They're not
ever
allowed to
changes
though, are they?
in
Because
this
the media's
country until the old
cracking
show
down.
breaks down.
And then we'll just be taken over by, well, who knows?
Media slaps them down, don't they?
Yeah.
Can I say, I think most of the public in Britain and the West are too comfortable, and we're obsessed with entertainment. We don't talk politics, and when we're less comfortable, you're going to start people talking about the real world. We can afford to have all these ideologies like feminism and all this other sort of stuff, but in reality, you know, men and women marriage was a contract, and it was one we survived. We don't have that now because we're too rich, or we think we're too rich.
I mean, we could talk about abolishing no-fault divorce, but it won't get anywhere because nobody cares. You see, I mean, I say it all the time, but nobody gets it. Or people are already divorced, so say, well, what do you expect me to do about it then? You know, so you know, all the bad stuff has already happened, and most people have had the stuffing knocked out of them. We know our MPs are so weak and powerless that they're not, you know, they're just happy to be in the same position 5 years from now, and they will, you know, be very careful not to say anything that might annoy anyone. So.
Don't you think the internet has had some say in this? I mean, it strikes me as being positively appalling that there seems to be no control over terrorists putting their material on the internet, pornographers putting pornography into the internet and corrupting tens of thousands of young children. I mean, I know I am a technophobe. I very much regret the advent of the internet. I very much regret the email, texting. I very much regret the ability of people to have mobile telephones. I think all this thing is a complete disaster for our civilization. I mean it quite seriously.
We should break all the spindles in the land and go to sleep for 100 years.
I think everything to do with modernism is ruining this country. And it's ruining it very, very fast.
That's what Hillary did.
Never used a mobile phone. I've never sent an email. Never will do.
I think we are where we are with the internet and mobile phone.
But why can't we stop terrorists?
We know what the government did to the Luddites, Sam. They hanged them.
I know I'm exceptional in that regard, but why can we not stop terrorists from posting appalling material or pornographers for corrupting people? It is shocking some of the things that can go on the internet. I mean, my daughter has got 2 young children. She has to be very careful as to what they see and what they don't see. And every day, if you get a train today, my train comes out to London, you see 20 people sitting in a row, not one of them reading a book, not one of them reading a newspaper, all of them pressing buttons to get into their thick heads completely unimportant things, such as where did my friend go and have her hair cut or somewhere. The very fact, last point, the very fact that David Cameron thought it suitable to give his wife's hairstylist an honour just about sums up the state of this country.
Well, very glad we got rid of David Cameron.
Sorry.
Very glad.
David
Cameron was determined to trash what remained his own reputation.
Do we have any more questions for Claire? Do you see you have a couple? Raymond, and then what's your surname?
My name's Rod Lonsdale.
Mr. Lonsdale, okay. Yeah, Raymond and then Mr. Lonsdale. Raymond, your question?
No, I haven't. Are we becoming a secular state?
Oh, what, sorry?
Secular.
A saccharine state?
Secular.
Secular.
I think we already are.
Yeah.
Because, you know, all the secular laws take priority over religious sensibilities. I mean, we have bishops in the House of Lords, but really all they do is go along with what the government wants anyway. So that they're not even, or if they don't, they're just being, you know, very lefty and Labour. because yes, Anglican clergymen are usually that way, aren't they? I think there's only one Conservative bishop, and that's Richard Chartres, and he's not doing much these days, is he?
My question is the church now Christian, or was the church secular?
Circular.
It's liberal.
Circular.
Right, Mr. Lonsdale.
Modern technology is antisocial and insular, and in cities it is, and it is antisocial. It's very rude. A lot of it's very rude. But one of the things that needs people is an important thing to realise is if they actually do control the internet, they're going to actually stop a lot of free speech. And the thing is, there is listening to the BBC, all that left-wing bullshit, everything we get from our people in Parliament, everything else. The thing is that there is an alternative movement where they're actually telling the truth. They will tell you about Hillary Clinton's criminal background. You don't hear about it from anywhere else, and I know it's very frustrating for people who are not online and who never will be. But that is one thing that is a saviour, is the fact that we can actually speak about what a lot of these people are really doing, because they control the other media. And unfortunately, newspapers are dying. People aren't watching TV. Children are watching screens on their phone, not watching telly. And yes, young people are watching porn from the ages of 7 or so. Shocking. It is shocking. But it is all not doom and gloom. One of our hopes is in the fact that we actually can talk about things honestly. That's what I think.
Yes.
You can.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
What's your name?
My name is James. I'm going to say that a government can get hold of the internet in a particular country and eliminate things like extreme porn or...
Well, yes. I mean, they can block certain websites, can't they? I mean, they already have the technology. They're just feeling a bit shy of doing that because of their, this free speech, free expression thingy that they feel they have to pay lip service to.
They'll shut us down, unfortunately. They'll shut down anyone who says anything they don't like, which will be...
They shouldn't shut down free speech, but there are harmful things out there.
Yeah, there are harmful things out there.
People have tried to jump me down for 50 years.
If there's no more questions, I'll no more questions, Dan? Thank you very much, Claire.
Okay.
I think Claire deserves a round of applause. I'd like to thank Claire for her very interesting talk tonight. We covered a huge range of issues tonight. When I come to write it all up, it will take me quite some time, which I will summarise and put it all together in some form, or I shall email it to you with my next member's newsletter. I strongly agree with all that Claire had to say tonight. I think we do emphasise sometimes different things in the meeting room. Some issues are more important to people than others, but I think we're pretty much set out our stall tonight. It's very much, social conservatism and immigration, and what nationalism means and doesn't mean, what the national interest is. We've also tried to define, and we've had a good discussion of moral issues as well, and religion to some degree. So even if people aren't particularly religious and going to church on Sundays, I still think they want to hear the church saying conservative things, not liberal things, and we don't really hear that. I think Bishop Chartres might be conservative, but I'm sure he probably has endorsed gay marriage like all the bishops have done. There's very few gay marriages, very few people prepared to stand up to gay marriage these days. This homosexual juggernaut really has, the political class has been demolished by it. Yeah. So that's one of the big issues that happened in the last few years. It's happened in America as well with the Obama administration, because the Supreme Court supports gay marriage now. Obama supported it. He abandoned any religious beliefs he had. He threw them all out the window, and he supports gay marriage. That's all happened in America. Even conservative states were forced to accept gay marriage, like Texas and Oklahoma. So I'm afraid there's a lot of unwelcome change there. Anyway, we hope for change under Mr. Trump in November.
Yes,
yes. So our next meeting will be October the 13th, which is a Thursday, and our speaker will be Lindsay Jenkins, and we'll be talking about Brexit. That'll be the issue there.
Who what?
Brexit.
Is she for it or not?
Oh, Lindsay's one of us.
Adam, what did you say?
No, she's one of us.
Eh?
Lindsay's one of us.
Is it?
Oh yes.
That's
Lindsay
nice.
Jenkins.
That's
She's
nice.
written two very good books.
Yes. Anyway, but I'd like to thank Claire anyway and make sure that we appreciate Claire for her efforts tonight. I look forward to seeing Claire at all future circle meetings.
Yes, yes.
We really value your friendship and membership.
Very good.
Great to be here.
I do have to raise some money for the circle.